right, good morning, good morning. One of the things I love about this class is all of the happy chatter as everybody comes in and says hello. But it's also part of the problem of getting everybody rounded up, and a little bit like herding cats, but we're there.
Fried chickens.
Yeah.
Just feed them, they'll stick around.
Well, there is that. But welcome to August.
Yes.
Can you believe, 7 months of the year are already gone, and we are in August. Yeah.
And school starts tomorrow.
Yeah, for a lot of people, school starts tomorrow, so be praying for teachers, particularly Christian teachers who are facing a lot of interesting challenges with the way some of the school districts are going and whatnot. So, yeah. Also, there is a card coming around for Jimmy Creekmer. I think it's still on the front row here, but it'll make its way through. Paul, would you open us this morning?
Dear kind and gracious Lord, we thank you that you allowed us another Sunday to be here to worship you and to do it in ways that only you can allow us to do, Lord. I pray that you open our ears and our hearts to the word that you've spoken, both by Harry and by Pastor Jerry, Lord, that we get out of it exactly what you have for each one of us individually, Lord. We take that and grow in a way you would have us to do, Lord. We ask all of these things in your humble Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, as you can see, I've kind of changed the opening header title from How to Live Under Pressure to Daniel, the rest of the story. I really don't have, we're still going to find some really great stuff, trust me on this, as we go through the rest of the book of Daniel here. But those principles for how to live under pressure, and we'll find some more things that we can kind of go with that as well, because everything that God gives us is for our good, right? And to help conform us to the image of Christ and to help us be the kind of people he wants us to be. But now I'm going to kind of focus in on the rest of the story. And as I mentioned last week, starting today through the rest of the book, he now writes in Hebrew. So now he's focused just on God's people. And that's why I took several weeks to go over the last chapter to really parse that out, because that's going to give us a foundation to work through all of the rest of this stuff. So with that kind of in mind, let me kind of review last week a little bit, that final bit of chapter 7. Who is the angel that Daniel may have been speaking to? Gabriel. And we're going to see that today, why people, and again in chapter 9, why biblical scholars really think that the angel he was speaking to was Daniel. Again, do we know that firmly from Scripture? No. But the evidence looks really good for it based on the next two chapters today, chapter Antichrist and chapter 9. Now, this week we're going to see another little horn. It's not going to be the same person. It's going to be similar, and I'm going to show you where one prefigures the other, but that's why I wanted to really slow down and give you all that information from last week so that you don't get this, because sometimes you say, oh, a little horn, another little horn, oh, it's got to be, and then all of a sudden you're confused. I know I was, and wandering down the wrong path. So we'll see that some more today. God's kingdom will be what? And in all its powers, and in all powers and peoples will serve and obey God.
Everlasting.
Everlasting. Absolutely. God's kingdom, all these other kingdoms that we've seen in Nebuchadnezzar's dream and now in the vision to Daniel, are any of these been permanent kingdoms?
No.
They all get supplanted, usually by the next one and then by the next one. But it says God's kingdom. We saw that way back with Nebuchadnezzar back in chapter 2, when the rock taken out without human hands hits the feet and destroys that entire statue, i.e. all of the kingdoms, that's the one that says then it's everlasting. You see God repeats that again and again. What was the ninth and final principle of how to live under pressure?
Listen to what God's telling you.
Listen. Remember, I started out last week talking about that anechoic chamber where you can really listen because there is no sound. But after a while, after a few minutes, anybody remember how long the longest anybody's ever lasted?
5 minutes.
45 minutes. Yeah. And a lot of people, they go into that sit, you have to sit because you'll get disoriented and they begin to hallucinate. It's crazy because we are so oriented to sound and ambient sounds that you don't even focus on. But God says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to listen. Listen to what I'm telling you. Because that's how you're going to live under pressure, is by paying attention to everything that I'm teaching you. All right, going into this week, what we're going to really look at a lot is some persecution. If you're not already, I would highly recommend you get on the Voice of the Martyrs and get on their regular email list. It will break your heart to see the persecution, because we live in a relatively persecution-free, at least for now, society as far as Christians. But you go into some other countries and see what's going on, and you will be shocked and dismayed, and it will change your prayer life dramatically. One such story from Voice of the Martyrs is a young man named Philip who lives in Laos. He walked 2 hours to another village to hear the gospel. And just 3 weeks after he returned home, then as a new believer, the police paid him a visit. They told him that any religion other than Buddhism was strictly forbidden in the region where he lived. They accused him of embracing the faith of foreigners and warned him that things were sure to go badly for him. Sometime later, then, the authorities pressed him to sign a document renouncing his newfound faith. He refused, and before long, his neighbors, incited by the local government, killed his livestock, harassed his children, and Philip finally had to move to another village. Asked why he remained a Christian when it caused him such difficulty, here's what he said. My people are in darkness, worshiping they know not what, and they are enslaved in their sin. I must tell them about Jesus, the only one who can save them from the destruction that awaits them. This is a new believer. And he's got it. He said, yeah, this persecution doesn't mean anything. My people, this is loving your neighbor the way Jesus described it, the way God described it back in the Old Testament. He said, even if all this happens, I've got to tell them because I can see where they're at. I was there. Others, like Philip, have suffered the loss of their jobs and their property. Some have been rejected by their family and friends. And many, many have been murdered for their faith in Christ. In fact, you will be amazed to see what the death count is for being a Christian in 2021 around the globe. So, Voice of the Martyrs, I can't recommend it highly enough. And that's what we're going to see in this vision. Now remember, we've gone back in time a little bit, right? Because as we went through the story, the Persians have come in, and everybody's been overthrown, and Daniel, we've already seen Daniel in the lion's den, which was under the Persian king. But now, last week and this week, all of a sudden, we're back in the time of Belshazzar, and he's had these visions. So that kind of tells you, as you begin to think of the timeline of Daniel, when Daniel went in and saw that handwriting on the wall, he had already had these two visions. See, as you read the Bible, that story happens before these. But then as you go back and put it back into its timeline that the scripture gives you, realize, oh, Daniel has already been told twice. Plus, you're going to find out next week that he's been studying scripture. And that's going to just blow you away as well, to see how God was already telling everybody, here's what's coming. You should know this. So let's get into Daniel chapter 8. Somebody want to read just the first 2 verses? We'll get the setting. Go ahead.
During the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, saw another vision, following the one that had already appeared to me. In this vision, I was at the fortress of Susa, in the province of Elam, standing beside the Ulai River.
All right, so first off, he just starts by setting it up for his readers. Again, his Hebrew readers, his fellow captives in Babylon. And he tells us, he begins to give us a time frame. First off, it's the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. So we can go into secular history and archaeology and get a time for that. I'll give that to you in just a minute. He also says this is 2 years after the last vision. So the last vision that we've been on for 3 weeks, this one happens 2 years later. So for your timeline, and for you fill in the blank types, this is about 550 BC. Because we know when Nabopolassar came to power, we know when Belshazzar was made regent there in Babylon, all this stuff, archaeological, non-biblical writings. So we can peg this down pretty tightly to about 550 BC. And to kind of put it on a world stage, this is the same time that Cyrus is defeating the Medes and combining the 2 kingdoms. And if you remember back several weeks ago, Cyrus's mother was a Mede. So it's that typical blending of kingdoms. If we marry somebody from the other kingdom, now our kingdoms are joined. And so he goes back to his mother's kingdom, kind of takes them over and makes this combined empire. It's happening the same time that Daniel is getting this vision. So you can see what's going on the world stage. He's not the big power yet, but he's coming. And in just about 12 years, he's going to march in and take Babylon without a shot. Remember, Babylon falls without a single shot, not an arrow, not nothing. They block the Euphrates, and they walk in right under the water gates and into the city and take it. Daniel, to kind of track him, is somewhere around 70 at this point. Because remember, when he gets to the lion's den, he's in his 80s. Which, that really, for me, the whole Daniel's and the lion den story changes when I realize this is an 82, 83-year-old man that they're throwing into the lions. So the location. In the vision, he sees himself in what's called the citadel of Susa. At the end of the vision, we're going to see that he has a short illness and then goes about the king's business. So we know he's still in Babylon. Now, a lot of Bible scholars feel that at some point during because he was in the hierarchy of Babylon and then again under the Persians, that he may have traveled to Susa. So he recognized it when he's there, but we know he's still in Babylon because at the end of the vision, we're going to see that he says, he kind of woke up from it. He's sick for a few days. He's stressed out. He gets sick. And then he goes about the king's business. So he's still in Babylon. But he sees himself in the citadel of Susa. To kind of put it on a map for you, it's about 220 miles east of Babylon and 150 miles north of the Persian Gulf. So we've all seen pictures of the Persian Gulf and all the craziness going on there. Go straight north where the Persian Gulf ends, and there's the citadel of Susa. At the time, it's called the capital of Elam. And if you want to do a little Bible study, you can find out who Elam was and trace him and whatnot. But it's the capital of the province of Elam. And later, it's going to become one of the Medo-Persian royal cities. Fact is, it's going to become the Persian king kind of summer home. It's also, for those of you that love to study Bible history and put this all together in kind of a mental map, this is the story of Esther is going to take place here with the Persian king and all of that. In 1901, archaeologists going through what we now know as Susa, that's where they found what is the Code of Hammurabi, which is the code of Babylonian kings and all of these laws. And you'll find it very similar to a lot of the laws in the Old Testament and a lot of the laws that we have today. People still quote back from the laws of Hammurabi. But it wasn't found in Babylon, it was found in Susa, and obviously brought there by scholars probably sometime after the Persians had taken over Babylon. So that kind of puts Susa on a map for you a little bit. The Ulai Canal. This is a man-made canal that connects two rivers. It's about 900 feet wide and passed very close to Susa on the north part of the city. That canal is currently dry. It's no longer used, but it had been used for a long time. Again, cities needed a water source, so man went in there and said, hey, here's a thing we can do. We'll just build us a canal between these two rivers. We have two water sources, so one gets a little low, we got the other one. We can irrigate our fields and so forth. So he sees himself there at Susa, by this Ulai Canal, and he points all of this as points on a map so that people are understanding, okay, we can go there, we can see this, we know exactly where he's at. I love when the Bible does that, because it gives me an exact time frame. I can go into secular history and find exactly when this happened. It gives me a spot on the map. I could literally, if I wanted to go to Iran, I could go where this exactly happened. I could see that handmade canal, no longer carrying water. I could see all this stuff and say, okay, this is all in a real place. So now let's kind of get the contents of the vision. I need a little longer reader. You're going to read verses 3 through 14. Go ahead. Go ahead. Strong, so everybody can hear you. Strong like bull.
I looked up, and there before me was a ram with two horns, standing beside the canal. And the horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but grew up later. I watched the ram as he charged toward the west, and the north, and the south. No animal could stand against him, and none could be rescued from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between his eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. He came toward the two-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged at him with great rage. I saw him attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering his two horns. The ram was powerless to stand up against him. The goat knocked him to the ground and trampled on him, and none could rescue the ram from his power. The goat became very great, but at the height of his power, his large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. And out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land, and grew until it reached the host of heavens, and it grew and it threw some of the starry host down to earth and trampled on them. It set itself up as the prince of the host. It took away the daily sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was brought low. Because of rebellion, the host of the saints and the daily sacrifice were given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to him, how long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, and the surrender of the sanctuary, and of the host that will be trampled underfoot. And he said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, and the sanctuary will be reconsecrated.
Wow. There's a ton of stuff there. So let's just kind of go through it very slowly, begin to understand it, begin to unpack this thing. Again, this is why I took so much time, 3 weeks, to go over chapter 7, because that's that foundation that we're going to step on as we go through the rest of the book. So in verses 3 and 4, we're introduced to the first character, the ram. The two-horned ram. In the interpretation by Gabriel, in verse 20 that we'll see coming up, we learn that this is Medo-Persian. Being represented by a ram is really fitting because according to the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, he's a historian from the 4th century AD, the Persian ruler carried the gold head of a ram when he marched before his army. So it was common that Cyrus or the other Persian leaders, Xerxes, whatnot, would carry this golden head of a ram to show the power as they were going to go and destroy whatever army they were going up against. It mentions specifically 2 horns, and one that came up later but grew bigger. This is the rise of Persia as the dominant power of the 2 teams, the Medes and the Persians. Media already controlled land to the east. So we're talking all the way to the Himalayas, to the border of what we now know as modern day India. The Medes already had that part. So when he joined forces with the Medes, he didn't need to move to the east. So here in Scripture it says this ram went north, south, and west. Went the other 3 points of the compass. This is going to take him towards Greece. And we know the secular history of Xerxes going after the Greeks. You know, the 600 and all those other stories. There's a number of raids, but he never conquers or takes over Greece. He moves to the south. They defeat Egypt. Egypt has become a secondary power by this point. In early Bible history, who's the big power? It's Egypt. But at this point, everybody rolls in and wipes out Egypt. It's kind of a thing that you go and do. And it even says the beautiful land. The beautiful land speaks of Israel. Remember, everything now is going to be concerning Israel. He's writing in Hebrew for the Israeli people. And so he's really focused on them. It says, and the beautiful land. So they're coming in here as well. Nothing could stand against it, and it became great. Well, the Medes and Persian Empire controlled more land than any empire prior to it. So God's already showing Daniel that this is what's coming. Remember, this is still Belshazzar. They haven't walked into Babylon yet. That's about 12 years down the road. And he's already telling them, here's what's coming. The second character that we get is the single-horned he-goat, or a common term, and in my title on here, the billy goat. Because a male goat is often referred to as billy goat. I couldn't find a good picture of a one-horned goat because it's just not a thing. So I did find one that had got its horn knocked off and has a single horn. But this kind of gives you a general picture then of what he's seen. Is this big single horn goat, a single horn up between its eyes coming out of the west. So this is our second character that he brings in. And this happens while Daniel is still thinking about the ram. He's still trying to wrap his head around this ram and moving to the south, north, and west, and all this stuff going on. While he's thinking about that, Scripture says, all of a sudden, this he-goat comes charging out of the west, this single-horned he-goat. So here it comes. It moves so swiftly that it appeared to not touch the ground and furiously attacked the ram. Any of you that have watched cartoons when you were a kid, you now have that mental picture, because when somebody would go fetch, they wouldn't even literally touch the ground. They would just kind of fly across. That's what's happening. He's seen this move so fast, and we've already kind of talked about that some in the past already. We've looked at these 4 kingdoms, that the thing about the Greeks was their speed. Nobody had ever seen their speed before. They just marched across land fast before anybody could build up their defenses. And that's what he's seen, is the speed of this thing. Looks like it's not even touching the ground. And it says it furiously attacked the ram. Well, yeah. Again, we understand our history. What had Persia been doing to the Greeks on and off over the years? Attacking them, raiding them. And now all of a sudden the Greeks are the big dog. Or the big ram. The big goat here. They're ticked. You've been coming in and killing our people and raiding our stuff, and he's coming hard and fast, right out. Alexander was only 20 when he became king. Think about that. How old are you? Yeah, how would you like to be king? Yeah, perfect, absolutely. Which is that is a typical 20-year-old response because they think they can do everything. It's not until you're about 40 that you realize, man, I don't know nothing. And that's, again, why does the military love 18 and 20-year-olds? Get up that hill, there's 3 machine guns, but we can take them, boys, yeah! A bunch of 40-year-old guys are going, oh no. Y'all call in an airstrike, and when it's done, we'll go up and count bombs. How about that, you know? He's 20. He knows his country's history. He's ticked, and he goes after them, and he goes after them fast and hard. And within 3 years, by the time he's 23, in 3 decisive battles, he wipes out the Medo-Persian Empire. Breaks the 2 horns of the ram. Extends himself all the way to India, all the way into Egypt. Everything, and as we've seen all in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, each kingdom supplants the other one, but that kingdom doesn't go away. The second kingdom just envelops what was already there. The Babylonian kingdom, Persians come in, they just take over Babylon and all of its. Greeks come in, they knock off Medes and Persians and take over everything they've got. When Alexander died, it says the great horn was broken. He had 2 sons, Alexander IV and Heracles, both who were almost immediately, suspiciously murdered. Well, that's the way you took over kingdoms in that time, and actually, probably still to this day, is you got rid of the successors. And as again, we know from history, and as we've seen in these repeated visions again, his 4 top generals, they fight each other for a bit, and then finally said, you know, let's quit fighting each other. You take this section, you take this section, you take this one, you take this one. And they divided that vast empire up into 4 sections, and we now have 4 new horns that again we see in this vision that come up. Remember in the last vision, the leopard with the 4 heads. So again, speed, but then breaking out. So we've seen this again and again and again as God paints that same picture over again. Then Scripture brings us up to the fun stuff. This is where I'm going to slow down a little bit, and if you got questions, don't think that, oh, I'm going to ask a stupid question. Because chances are there's 12 other people in it going, what? Wait a minute. So please ask the questions. We have a little horn that says came up out of one of those other horns. This tells us right off this is not the same little horn as on the 4th beast. The 4th beast is Rome. We are talking Greece. So we're going to have another little horn. God's going to give us the same word picture. So he's going to tell us, hey, I'm showing you what that little horn, I'm going to give you another one and give you a kind of a taste of what's coming with that one. Because here's going to be another one. So the little horn. The kingdom was divided amongst his 4 generals, the 4 prominent horns. So this little horn. One of the 4 horns grew a little horn. Out of the 4 divisions, this king comes and he's of unusual significance. So we have 4 different kings, they're all divvied up, they're doing their thing. But this one God takes special note of. He's going to be a special problem. Again, who's Daniel talking to? Who's he writing to? Israel. So who's he going to be a problem for? Israel. Absolutely. That's his focus. And that's God's focus in giving him the picture.
So likely, this is now focusing in on the one of the 4 that ended up with Israel in their territory.
Yeah. So it's going to be the Syrian king.
Right.
And out of that kingdom comes this guy.
Okay.
And I'm going to introduce him to you here in just a second. It said it grew to the southeast and the glorious or beautiful land, Israel. And here's one of the great things is both liberal and conservative scholars see this as Antiochus IV Epiphanes. who had notable conquests in the south, in Egypt, the east, in Persia, Parthia, Armenia, and absolutely devastated Israel. He and his attacks on God's people are a precursor of the little horn at the end time that we've already seen. Now, I have a couple of guys who are going to give you a handout, and I'm going to, on it, because I don't have time this morning, so I want to give it to you in a written document. Plus, it'll give you time to read over it, take it home, and really look at it. And look at the comparisons between Antichrist and this little horn out of Greece, Antioch Epiphanes. By the way, Epiphanes, he gave himself, that's a title, that's not a name. And the name Epiphanes means the illustrious one, or God manifest. So I'm Antioch, the illustrious one. So you can see how he feels about himself. This isn't a guy with real self-esteem problems. Now what's even more fun, you'll see on the handout, is the Jews changed it slightly, a little play on words. They called him Antioch Epimanes, which means the madman. So he says, I'm the illustrious one. And the Jews were saying, you crazy. He and his attacks on God's people are this precursor of the little horn that we've already been introduced to on the fourth beast. We've already been introduced to in Revelation. But we're going to get a precursor, a picture of what that guy's going to look like in history here. Also, if you have a Bible at home that's got some of the apocryphal books, if you want to read this entire story, it's in Maccabees. I'm actually going to be quoting Maccabees a little bit because that's the story of Antiochus Epiphanes and the Jews' revolt, and Judas Maccabee leading the revolt and restoring the temple and all that sort of thing. It says that this little horn threw some of the starry hosts down to earth and trampled on them. This signifies that Antiochus would severely persecute the Jewish saints, the Jewish believers. Now again, Jesus hasn't been. These are people who are actually believe and are following the Old Testament law. They believe in God. They're looking forward to a Messiah. And it says he's going to throw them to the earth and trample on them. This begins, again, from secular history. We know right when this happens, about 170 BC with the assassination of the high priest Onias III. And the setting up of a false high priest, one who paid for the position. And then it terminates about 163 BC at his death. So about a 7-year period. Again, that should begin to kick some of those that we've said in Revelation. Oh, a 7-year period, absolutely. But again, God's giving a pre-show of what's coming at the end times. During this period, he executed thousands of Jews. It's estimated to be somewhere around 80,000 men, women, boys, girls, and even infants. He plundered the temple of its treasures, including the furniture that was covered with precious metals. And probably his piece de resistance, the worst sacrilege that he could do, was that he erected an altar or a statue to Zeus right in the temple, and then offered pigs on it, slaughtered and offered pigs in the temple to Zeus. The prince of verse 11 is God. We see here that this horn, like the little horn on the fourth beast, because remember this guy's just a precursor. He's just kind of a warm-up act. But to let you know what it's going to be like. And like the little horn on the fourth beast, this little horn considers himself to be the equal to the prince of princes, to God. Thus he defies God by setting up this altar to Zeus and sacrificing an unclean animal, a pig, right in the middle of the temple. History records that Antiochus insisted that the Jews not follow their religious laws, diet, circumcision, Sabbath, feast, and required allegiance to himself and the Greek gods. And right as Daniel is getting all of this, all of a sudden the scene changes and we see two heavenly beings, two angels, having a conversation about all of this. They have the question of how long is this going to go on? How long would temple worship cease? How long is the persecution going to go on? The interesting thing here to me, and the thing that I see continue through Scripture, is angels are interested in God's people. They are God's servant messengers, and they are really interested in what is happening to God's people. God, how are you doing this? See, they don't have the picture either. Only God does. And they're really interested. God, what's going to go on here? And the lead angel, again, some people think this is Gabriel. I've read everything on that. I think it might be a little stretch. I don't have a problem with it if it is. It just doesn't say. But kind of the lead angel gives the answer, and actually he's kind of giving the answer to Daniel. Because Daniel's sitting here, you've seen, your little kid, and you and your spouse are having a discussion, and it's like watching a tennis game, and they're watching the discussion. That's what's going on here. He's going, what? Yeah, what? Yeah, I want to know. The guy says, it's going to be, and he gives him an exact number, 2,300 evenings and mornings. And now the Bible scholars go nuts. But let me synthesize it down to you to two main theories. There's all kinds of variations in here, and Cindy will tell you I spent literally hours trailing them and sitting around and going, oh geez, I had to get up and leave because my head was getting all full. So theory one, it's 2,300 mornings and evenings. That would be 1,150 evenings, 1,150 mornings. So a little more than 3 years. Getting close to the 3.5 years, not a little less. To argue for that, in December 167, Antiochus set up an altar or a statue to Zeus in the temple. Judas Maccabeus, again, you can read this in the book of Maccabees, the whole story. He rededicates the temple on December 14th, 164 BC. So there's your little over 3-year timeline. This, by the way, for you non-Jewish religion folks, is the origin of Hanukkah. Hanukkah. So this story that we see here in the Bible that's really dealt with in the apocryphal book Maccabees gives you the background and history for why Hanukkah is still celebrated today. The defeat of that and the bringing back of the temple, getting rid of that altar to Zeus. And the story in Maccabees tells you that they completely kind of went in and gutted the temple to get rid of all of that stuff that had been, pig blood on it, whatnot, and rebuilt the inside of the temple. So that's the argument for that 1150 and 1150 making the 2,300. The other main theory is that it's just a plain reading, 2,300 days. Because the Bible opts it even in creation. It was the evening, it was the morning, it was the first day. It was the evening and the morning, it was the second day. So this makes about 6 years and 4 months. This lines up very nicely with the persecution beginning with the time of the murder of Onias III through the death of Antiochus. That's about 2,300 days. So right when Antiochus really comes in, begins the oppression. And by the way, the oppression hasn't really started with the murder of Onias. He's just that's the first domino to fall. And then his death, there's your 2,300 days. So here's your two big theories. I like them both. They both have good biblical timelines. And the advantage that we have as Christians in 2021 is that we get to look back at history for all of this. Daniel was looking forward to what was coming. He's still in Babylon. He's still under Belshazzar. The Persians haven't even come in yet. And he's already seen, God's telling him, write this down. I want my people to know what's coming. Now, have other people taken this number and gotten wacky with it? Yeah, let me give you just one. The Seventh-day Adventists, a long time ago, believed that that was the 2300 was actually years. So they believed at the time, in the early 1800s, that they did their math and that the 2300 years would culminate in 1844. And that's when Christ would come back for his second coming. And they got all ready. They literally sold their homes, their farms, everything, went out and said, yes, we're ready. And then 1845 came.
And they were still there.
And 1846 and 2021. So the Seventh-day Adventists had to go in and rewrite some of their doctrinal beliefs when the 2300 years did not culminate in the return of Christ in 1844. So you can take these numbers in the Bible and go really wacky with them. You have to be very, very careful. This is all written for Daniel. For us, it's in the past. But I'm going to hold on to the end. There's a really great truth to come out of all this. So now we're going to get the interpretation of the vision. All we've gotten is the vision so far. We got rams, we got goats, we got horns breaking off, we've got the starry host being thrown down and trampled underfoot, and all of this stuff coming. And again, Daniel's just he's back on his heels going, what? And we're going to get an interpretation of it, another angelic interpretation. So give me another reader, verses 15 through 27. Go ahead. Yep.
While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man. And I heard a man's voice from the Goliath calling, Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision. As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. Son of man, said to me, understand that the vision concerns the time of the end. While he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep, with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and raised me to my feet. He said, I am going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece. A large horn between his eyes is the first king. The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power. In the later part of their reign, when rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of iniquity, will rise. He will become very strong, but not in his own power. He will cause astounding devastation and will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause the seed to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the prince or princes. Yet he will be destroyed, but not by human power. The vision of the evenings and mornings that have been given you is true. Let's seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. I, Daniel, was worn out. I lay exhausted for several days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision. It was beyond understanding.
Wow. Yeah.
Man, I was exhausted.
Yeah. In just a few verses, bam, the angel lays it out for him, and he's just whacked by it. So kind of to begin this interpretation, in verses 15 and 16, Daniel sees this imposing figure with the appearance of a man who then directs Gabriel to give the meaning of the vision. Appearance of a man, the Son of Man. We've already seen him in the last vision. He's standing there in the air above the Ulai, this man-made canal, and he directs Gabriel We now know exactly who he is. He's the one who's giving orders to Gabriel. This is nothing more than God himself. This is Jesus in his pre-incarnate glory. And we know that he's in his glory because we see what happened to Daniel. In fact, it's every time you see somebody being transported to heaven in a vision, every time, what happens?
All on their face.
They are free. The fear of the Lord. This is true fear. Oh my, I am not worthy. I have no comparison. I have no nothing. And he goes down. Verse 17, his reaction. He falls prostrate to the ground. And Gabriel begins, I love this address. He begins by addressing him as Son of Man. Literally, Ben Adam. Or Ben Adam. Ben Adam. Or son of that which comes from the ground. That's what the name Adam means, by the way. Coming from the dirt. Said, you son of that which comes from the dirt. Takes us right back to Genesis. How was man made? From the dust of the earth. And the famous line in funerals, from dust to dust. So I love his address to him. Daniel is apparently so overcome by all of this that he passes out. Gone. Out. Funk. One of my daughters was a fainter. That was always fun. Something happened, you'd watch her eyes roll up and somebody go, grab Molly! Because that's how I shoot. He is so overcome with this vision, this guy standing, Gabriel talking to him, that he goes, shunk, out, and he has to be roused. He has to be woken up. In my mind's eye, I see Gabriel lifting him up and going, hey, Daniel, wake up. I got more to tell you here. I live in a comedy world in my mind, that's why. But he has to be roused to be told the interpretation. So let's look at that interpretation. Later in the time of wrath is better translated in the latter part of the time of wrath. So the time of wrath is coming, and in the latter part of that, here's what's coming. Then he begins, and I alluded to this already in verse 20. He tells who the players are. The two-horned ram is Medo-Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece. And the large horn is the first king. Well, again, the beautiful thing about being able to look back into history, Daniel's still looking forward, we know exactly who the first major king of Greece was. Alexander. Now again, put all this in your head. It's still several years away from the handwriting on the wall when he goes in and interprets that, but he's already has these two visions. Does that help you begin to understand how he was able to interpret that reading?
Which means he'd seen this before the king called him in from the writing on the wall.
Exactly. He had already had these visions several years before Belshazzar ever calls him in. I purposely didn't mention that when we covered that part of the story. I wanted to bring it back out here and reverse it in your head. Because I love the way the Bible does that. You all of a sudden you're going, oh, well that means that, yes. And he, yes. Well then, yes. Isn't that cool? Yeah, it's cool.
Well, then it's a lot that Daniel lived with all those years.
Yeah.
Done to himself. Apparently, he didn't even talk it over with his friends.
Yeah. Well, maybe. We don't know. It doesn't tell us.
Kept it to himself.
Yeah, he wrote it down, i.e. he didn't go spreading it around. But so, the description then of the little horn. Again, here's where Bible scholars begin to diverge a little bit. But this is why I gave you this handout, so you can begin to see the comparisons. First off, it says he's a stern-faced king. He's harsh. He's a master of intrigue. He's political, who will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will prosper or be successful in what he does, and will cause deceit to prosper. He considers himself superior to everyone. He was a proud, self-seeking ruler. Again, these are precursors and picture of what that next little horn that comes up on that fourth beast is going to be. Same kind of guy. And the thing about that is, one of the things I find comforting in that, is that Satan doesn't have an original thought in his head. He repeats the same thing over and over again. He's successful with it because people refuse to learn, but he just does the same thing again and again. So he's doing it here, and then he's going to do it again, and people are going to go, wow, wait a minute, he's already done this. And what he usually does is just imitate things that God does. In fact, that's what he does all the time. He doesn't have any original thoughts. And then he stands against the Prince of Princes. The last descriptor of him is probably the best. He will be destroyed, but not by human power. We see that with the Antichrist. Is the Antichrist destroyed by his fellow humans? If you remember our study of Revelation, what happens to him when Jesus comes back? He is scooped up and thrown into the lake of fire. Boom! He is not destroyed by human hands. And God points out to Daniel, this little horn, same thing, is not going to be destroyed by human power. According to Maccabees chapter 6, verses 1 through 16, Antiochus died of grief and remorse in Persia after he was defeated at the siege of the city of Elymas, and then also received words that his forces had been routed and absolutely destroyed by the Jews under Judas Maccabeus. Thus the book of Maccabees. And he just freaks out and literally dies of kind of a broken heart. Yes?
Is the Prince of Princes Jesus?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, kind of referring to God at that point. But we've already seen a Son of Man in chapter 7, and one with a figure like a man there. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So he's not destroyed by human hands. He literally dies of freaking out because his forces have been on two fronts, have been wiped out, and he realizes his time is over. Again, if you want to read the book of Maccabees, that's chapter 6. It gives his whole story in a lot more detail. Gabriel then assures Daniel that his vision was true and would happen down to the exact time, evenings and mornings. What's that exact time? 2300. Whether it's 1150 and 1150, making 2300, or 2300, 24-hour. Because like I said, I gave you the evidence for both. They both kind of work for me. But the angel Gabriel tells him this is going to happen. These are true, and it's going to happen down to the exact time that we've already told you. And he tells him to seal it up. This doesn't mean to make it hidden. It means to preserve it. It's not going to be kept hidden from God's people. He wanted God's people to know it. He wrote it in Hebrew. But the Gabriel says, put a seal on it so that it doesn't get destroyed, so that it can be reread and kept and preserved. So now we have the whole vision, we have the whole interpretation. And Daniel, being one of the wisest guys of all time, is walking out going, okay, I got this, thank you God, I'll prepare my people and we'll be ready. That wasn't his reaction at all. In fact, just what did we read? He's emotionally and physically drained. This experience has just left him wiped out, and he falls ill for a few days. High stress can do that. In fact, high stress is one of the leading cause of major illness. There was a time in my life back just before I became a police officer, and I took a stress test, not a stress test, on the treadmill, but a written, what are the stressors in your life? And it got to the top of the chart and it ran out. Because at that point in my life, I had my father-in-law shot. I was changing careers. I had just buried my number 3 daughter. We had lost our house. That was back in '88. When the last big collapse, we had a big collapse a few years ago. That was the last big one. I lost my house, I lost my car, I lost everything. And we had to move to a rental house that Cindy will tell you, she said, I'll move in here, but you fixing this place up. And I had a very nice landlord that said, yeah, man, if you'll repaint and put new floors, I'll just send me not your time, but your materials cost, and I'll take it off your rent. And I redid that entire home to make it a home for Cindy. But my stress was off the chart with all of these things happening in my life. There's a number of you that are having high stress times in your life. That's why I'm so enthused about going through the book of Daniel. How do I live under that kind of pressure? And we've already gotten all of those principles for how to deal with that. And the doctor who gave me that test at the time said, you're due for a major illness. Something's going to happen because you are off our charts with everything that you're dealing with in your life. I said, yeah, but I know who holds my hand and who has my future. And there's not going to happen. And it did not. God walked me through that time. And because he walked me through that time, basically what he did was, and I'm going to use a modern thing, he gave me an inoculation so that I could then turn around and give my serum to others who are struggling.
Did it change your DNA?
It did not. It did change my DNA, but for the better. So much so, and we've talking about the signs, and those signs that were the bane of my existence for a year, that are up and going now. Those signs, let me tell you a true story. Those signs this week, I had a gentleman driving through, dropped his grandkids off at school. He lives in Maricopa, and drove up the freeway and got off and was just looking around Levine. His wife of 35 years had died. His grandkids are spread in 3 different states. He's got one daughter living here with a man friend who has fathered all 3 of her children but has never bothered to marry her, who's now gotten another girlfriend and wants to make it a collective kind of girlfriends and thing. And so his heart as a father is hurting, and his wife is gone and all that. And he was driving by and saw the sign and said, and he's a believer, but he kind of got his focus off of the love that Jesus had for him. And that's easy to do, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Y'all done that? This week? And he saw that sign and said, there's somebody in there that will listen to me. And he drove in, came in, he's on a cane, and came in and sat in my office. But he also had lost a child. See, God gave me an inoculation years ago to make ready for a day in Levine in 2021. But that, as I pointed out to you, that's what the body of Christ is. The fact that we go to a different church doesn't mean anything. We are one body, and we are there to do it. So he falls ill. I kind of wandered off there a little bit. High stress can do that, but then he gets up and goes back to working for the king. So we know he's still in Babylon. He's not actually physically in Susa. And after a few days, after he finally recovers, what does he do? Gets back and goes back to work.
Is it significant that even knowing the future, he didn't sit down and wait for it?
Yes. Yeah. It says he went back to work.
Yes.
Yeah, he didn't say, okay, well, all right, God, bring it on. I'm going to sell my house and my farm and. And yet, it records, the final thing that we see is that he was appalled by the vision. And he said it was beyond my understanding. He had an angel tell him what it was. And Daniel, the great writer of Daniel, the guy who's lived through these, he's going to live through the lion's den. He hasn't been there yet, but he's seen or heard about his 3 friends in the fiery furnace, and he's interpreted dreams, and he's been through all of this stuff, and he's sitting there looking at it, even with an angel explaining it to him, going, I don't get it. But I'm going to write it down because I was told to. And then in a few years, he's going to be called in to read handwriting on the wall. And I think that's when the picture is going to begin to, wait a minute. Goats, rams, yeah. And interprets that handwriting.
You know, right there, he didn't understand it, he just did it.
He just did it.
And as believers, there's so much that we go through, that we deal with, that we just don't understand. And God says, it's okay, just keep going.
You just keep working. Get back to work, and I'll work this out. I told you this information for a reason, but you don't have to understand anything, because chances are you're not going to understand everything. Not ever. Maybe in heaven. I'm really counting on that. You know, God, I got some questions. I know we got eternity, so sit down. I got some questions. Yeah. But Daniel just gets back up, says, man, I don't get it, but I'm writing it down and I'm going back to work. Let me send you home. Oh gosh, we're early. Any other questions? I got a couple of minutes. Are you beginning to see this whole big picture here now in Daniel, and timelines and all that's coming together? Yes.
This is not put together for me, the timeline. We keep talking about this is happening after the writing on the wall. And
Before.
yeah, before.
Yeah.
But in scripture, the writing on the wall was happening back in like Daniel 5.
Yeah. Another one of the questions I have. Why didn't you put chapter 7 and 8 in a chronological timeline before chapter 5?
It's almost like it's 2 separate books.
Yeah. And one of the criticisms, particularly the criticism of Daniel, is it's pseudo-Daniel, that it was written in the 2nd century, looking back and all this stuff. That's one of the arguments they have for it, is that, why would this be here? So if this is somebody that just added something to it. And yeah.
So is that the break? The break is between the Aramaic and the Hebrew.
That is the break in the book, is the language of writing.
So in that, the Hebrew stuff that's coming after is really happening before.
These 2 chapters.
Those 2 chapters. Okay.
Right. Now, next week when we get to chapter 9, we're going to be back into the first year of Cyrus.
And are
The Persians are in charge.
indications in the scripture that tell us it was before?
Only because he gives us the dates of it. He's working for Belshazzar.
Okay.
Well, we know. And it says, in fact, it said the 3rd year of Belshazzar. I can go into archaeological records and I can pinpoint that right to 550 BC. 551, 550 BC.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, how do we know, like what words or like dates, but that makes sense though. We still
Yeah. So the natural break in the book, it starts out chapter 1 up through verse 4 of chapter 2 is in Hebrew as he introduces his book. Then he switches to Aramaic, the language of the world, the international language. And then here in chapter 7, or in chapter 8, he refers back to Hebrew. And now from 8 through 12, it's all in Hebrew. So thus the break, and we have to kind of interpose the timeline back. But it helps to explain what we already read in the Aramaic portion.
And how does that help with like the wall? Within like, so from like, since this is before, was Daniel just able to interpret then the wall?
I think it probably helped, because again, and as I showed when we did that, it's written in, right, but it's written vertically instead of right to left. It's still right to left, but vertically, and all of a sudden he's looking at it and said, oh, wait a minute. The many tekel, rams, goats, kingdoms, leopards, bears. Oh, yes, I know what this is.
So it's kind of like history repeating itself then with Revelation.
Yes.
Right? So, I mean, so again, shouldn't we today be looking at history repeating itself, maybe not to this extent, but in other areas, other things, and power is coming and power is going, so to speak. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying this very good, but.
But I get where you're going, but yeah, and history does, because Satan repeats himself,
Right.
and man's pride repeats itself. It always goes to the same thing. And it's only man that repeats the same activity and expects a different result.
Well, isn't the rest of what we're gonna study in Daniel is gonna be stuff that is still to come, correct?
Yes, as far as Daniel is concerned.
Partway through this.
Yeah, we are just,
Then it's gonna start mirroring stuff we've studied in Revelation.
yep, chapter 8 just begins, and wait till chapter 9. I'm going to split that into 2 weeks, because again, there's this, and if you want to read ahead, read the prayer, Daniel's prayer. It's one of the greatest prayers in the Bible. We have been praying for America the last month. Read Daniel chapter 9, just the prayer portion this week, and pray that prayer for America. But anyway, I'm getting ahead. Let me finish off for today. Here's your truth. Here's your take home for today. God's omniscience is seen here. He knows the future. He knows everything. Even a future where his saints are severely persecuted. Sorry, best life now, folks. And the health and wealth preachers, God knows he's omniscient. He knows everything. Even when his followers are going to be persecuted, and what that looks like. But the thing is God is, one of his attributes is light. Light helps you to see. And God always wants us to see. Now, he doesn't want us to see too far, because then we get a little arrogant and start doing it on our own. But God always points out what is coming. Because he wants his people to see, but he wants his people to rely on him. And there's your big truth for today, is God's omniscience. He's telling Daniel that this little horn is coming. Antioch Epiphanes is going to mess with my people, but it's only for 2,300 days. And I said, you can read that story in Maccabees and look at the story of Hanukkah. I know a few Christians that celebrate Hanukkah for that very reason. And I don't have a problem with it, because of God's restoration of his people. Rick, would you close us this morning?
Father God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the lessons that Terry's brought forth. We hope that we have learned something and understood something about your word and your desire for our lives, Lord. We ask that you be with us as we go to hear the message from Pastor Jerry, and that would also have an impact on our lives and our behavior. We love you, Lord, and we thank you for everything you do for us. In your precious and holy name. Amen.
Amen.